Tonight, we unwrap a peculiar chapter of American history, one that unfolds in the quiet hours when the world slows down and memory becomes sweeter than any confection. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a time when chocolate was not merely a treat, but a doorway to something altogether more remarkable, when each bite carried with it the promise of energy that seemed to defy the natural limits of the human body, when mothers and fathers handed their children squares of brown sweetness and wondered, hours later, why bedtime had transformed into an impromptu circus of activity and ambition. We are traveling backward through the fog of decades to the early 1900s, to an America that stood on the threshold of modernity, where factories hummed their mechanical hymns and immigrants arrived with dreams folded carefully in their pockets, where the electric light was still new enough to inspire wonder, and the automobile remained an expensive curiosity reserved for the very wealthy. In this world, chocolate was beginning its remarkable journey from European luxury to American staple. And one company in particular, a modest enterprise in Pennsylvania bearing the name Hershey, was about to change the way an entire nation experienced dessert. If you find yourself drawn to these forgotten corners of history, to the strange and beautiful accidents that shaped the world we inhabit today, then settle deeper into your pillows and allow yourself to drift through this tale with us. For what begins as a simple story about chocolate will carry us through medicine and madness, through factory floors and family parlors, through government hearings and whispered legends that refuse to fade even now, more than a century later.
The turn of the 20th century arrived with all the confidence of youth, bringing with it inventions that promised to remake human existence entirely. The Wright brothers would soon lift their fragile aircraft into the Carolina sky, and in laboratories across the nation, scientists were discovering that the natural world contained secrets far more potent than anyone had previously imagined. Plants that had sustained indigenous peoples for thousands of years were being examined, isolated, concentrated, and added to all manner of products, from wines that promised to cure melancholy to syrups that claimed to restore vitality to the exhausted masses laboring in mines and mills and endless rows of crops. Chocolate arrived into this atmosphere of boundless optimism and insufficient regulation, a substance that had once been reserved for the aristocratic of Europe but was now being democratized by American ingenuity and mass production. Milton Hershey, a man who had failed spectacularly at several business ventures before finding his calling in confectionery, understood something fundamental about the American appetite, that people desired not merely sustenance but transformation, that they longed for small miracles they could afford, that they wanted to believe in progress they could taste. The early Hershey bars were smooth and sweet, yes, but they contained something more, an ingredient that would not appear on modern labels, an extract derived from leaves that had been sacred to the Incan Empire, leaves that messengers had chewed as they ran impossible distances through mountain passes, leaves that had been offered to gods and emperors, leaves that contained alkaloids capable of gently nudging the human nervous system into a state of heightened alertness and focus. The coca leaf, source of a substance that would later be strictly controlled and criminalized, was in those early years simply another botanical ingredient, no more controversial than vanilla or cinnamon, added to wines and tonics, and yes, to chocolate bars produced by a respectable Pennsylvania businessman. No one thought themselves scandalous for eating these bars, no more than someone today might question the caffeine in their morning coffee. The amounts were small, the effects subtle, but they were there nonetheless, a gentle acceleration of thought and movement, a lifting of spirits that seemed perfectly aligned with the optimistic spirit of the age. Mothers packed these chocolate bars in lunch pails for their husbands heading to construction sites and steel mills. Teachers kept them in desk drawers to reward students who mastered their spelling words. Socialites served them at afternoon gatherings where conversation flowed with unusual animation and wit. The factory where these bars were produced operated with the relentless rhythm of early industrial America, where workers arrived before dawn and departed long after sunset, where the air hung thick with the scent of roasting cocoa beans and melting sugar, where conveyor belts carried endless rows of chocolate rectangles toward their foil wrappings and cardboard boxes. The men and women who worked these lines sampled the product regularly, as much for quality control as for the subtle boost it provided during the long, tedious hours of repetitive labor.
Some claimed they could work longer shifts than their counterparts at other factories. Others simply appreciated that their employer provided a product that made the day feel slightly less burdensome. In homes across America, the Hershey bar became woven into the fabric of daily life in ways both practical and peculiar. A father would return from his office and eat a square before tackling the evening chores, finding that he could repair the garden fence or reorganize the tool shed with unusual efficiency. A mother might nibble a piece while preparing dinner, discovering that the tedious work of peeling potatoes and kneading dough felt less oppressive, that she could hum while she worked and still have energy from mending clothes after the dishes were washed. Children, of course, experienced the most dramatic effects, transforming from the relatively sedate youngsters of morning into whirling dynamos by afternoon, inventing elaborate games that seemed to require neither rest nor restraint. Physicians of the era, operating with theories of health that seem quaint and occasionally alarming by modern standards, often recommended chocolate for a variety of complaints. A patient suffering from nervous exhaustion might be told to consume a small amount of quality chocolate each day. Someone recovering from illness could be advised that chocolate would help restore their strength and vitality. The medical establishment had not yet adopted the skepticism that would characterize later decades. Instead, doctors embraced the idea that natural products, properly prepared, could offer genuine therapeutic benefits without the harsh side effects of the mineral-based medicines that had dominated earlier generations. The advertising of the period reflected this medical optimism, with posters and magazine spreads depicting robust men and rosy-cheeked women engaged in various productive activities, all accompanied by text that promised chocolate could improve digestion, settle nerves, and provide the energy necessary for modern life. These were not seen as outrageous claims, but as simple statements of fact, observations confirmed by the lived experience of thousands of satisfied customers who reached for Hershey bars when they needed a boost and found that the boost arrived as promised. In schools, the presence of chocolate created an environment that teachers navigated with varying degrees of success. The one-room schoolhouses of rural America and the crowded urban classrooms of growing cities both contended with students whose attention could be remarkable, but whose capacity for stillness had been compromised by their lunchtime treats. Lessons in arithmetic might proceed with unusual speed as hands shot up eager to demonstrate mastery of multiplication tables. Reading time could become a competition to see who could finish a passage fastest. Recess transformed into an elaborate exhibition of physical exuberance, with children racing and climbing and inventing games that seemed to require boundless reserves of energy. The teachers themselves were not immune. Many kept their own supply of chocolate, eating a square during the brief midday break when students were occupied with their lunches, finding that the afternoon lessons felt more manageable when they possessed the same heightened alertness as their pupils. Some schools briefly experimented with banning chocolate from the premises, only to discover that enforcement was nearly impossible, and that the students who arrived without their customary treat were listless and difficult to engage, while those who had managed to sneak a bar past the new regulations performed with their usual animated enthusiasm. Beyond the classroom and the home, chocolate found its way into nearly every corner of American social life. Church socials featured chocolate cakes and cookies that left congregations unusually chatty and prone to volunteering for committees. Factory owners discovered that providing chocolate at mid-shift could improve productivity measurably. Baseball teams began to keep Hershey bars in the dugout, with players insisting that a piece before taking the field improved their performance at bat and in the field. The bars became a form of currency among children, traded for marbles and comic books and baseball cards, coveted not merely for their taste, but for the way they made an ordinary afternoon feel full of possibility. The social clubs and parlor gatherings of the upper classes developed their own rituals around chocolate, with hostesses competing to serve the finest cocoa drinks and the most elegant chocolate confections, with conversations at these events noted for their unusual liveliness and wit. Women who might typically spend an afternoon discussing recipes and children instead found themselves debating politics and literature with unexpected passion. Men who gathered for cigars and brandy discovered that adding chocolate to the evening made the conversation sharper and the hours pass more quickly. There were, inevitably, those who raised concerns. Temperance advocates, fresh from their campaigns against alcohol, began to wonder whether chocolate represented a new threat to moral rectitude and self-control. Ministers delivered sermons warning that excessive reliance on any substance, even one as innocent-seeming as chocolate, could lead to weakness of character. Doctors occasionally published articles in medical journals expressing concern about patients who seemed unable to function without their daily chocolate, who reported feeling sluggish and irritable on the rare days when they abstained. These concerns remained relatively muted, however, drowned out by the chorus of satisfied customers and the steady expansion of the Hershey Company. The factory in Pennsylvania grew larger, employing more workers, producing more bars, shipping chocolate to every corner of the nation. Milton Hershey became a figure of genuine prominence, admired as a self-made man who had transformed failure into spectacular success, who provided jobs to hundreds and pleasure to millions, who had built not merely a company but an entire town around his factory, complete with housing for workers and parks for their families. The coca leaf extract that gave those early bars their distinctive qualities was not a secret exactly, but neither was it prominently advertised. The ingredient lists of the era were far less detailed than what modern consumers expect, often simply listing chocolate, sugar, and milk, without specifying every minor component. The coca leaf, like many botanical additives of the period, was considered unremarkable, one ingredient among many, in an age when food manufacturing was still finding its footing and regulation remained light. This would change, of course, as the progressive movement gathered strength and reformers began to demand greater transparency and safety in food production. The publication of Upton Sinclair's novel about the meatpacking industry horrified readers and spurred Congress to action, resulting in legislation that would forever alter how food was produced and labeled in America. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 represented a watershed moment, a declaration that consumers had the right to know what they were eating and that manufacturers had a responsibility to be truthful. For Hershey and other chocolate makers, this new regulatory environment required adjustments. The coca leaf, once an unremarkable botanical additive, was increasingly viewed with suspicion as scientists isolated and concentrated its active compounds and as reports emerged of addiction and social problems associated with more potent formulations. The company faced a choice: continue using an ingredient that was becoming controversial, or reformulate their product to align with changing public sentiment and legal requirements. The decision, when it came, was made quietly. There were no public announcements, no recall of existing inventory, no admission that anything had changed. Instead, over a period of months and years, the recipe evolved. The coca leaf extract was gradually reduced and then eliminated entirely, replaced by nothing more exotic than additional cocoa and sugar. The bars that emerged from the factory looked identical to their predecessors, wrapped in the same familiar foil, bearing the same trusted name, but the subtle acceleration they had once provided was gone. Some longtime customers noticed immediately. The chocolate still tasted wonderful, but the gentle lift that had made an afternoon feel more manageable was absent. They found themselves needing an extra cup of coffee or simply accepting that the day would proceed at its natural, slower pace. Others adapted without conscious awareness, assuming that they were simply getting older or that the demands of modern life were wearing them down more than they remembered. The children whose behavior in classrooms had so challenged their teachers became somewhat calmer, still energetic in the way of all young people, but no longer quite so relentlessly in motion. Teachers found that lessons could proceed with fewer interruptions, though some secretly missed the animated enthusiasm that had made even the dullest subjects feel slightly more engaging. Parents discovered that bedtime routines became more predictable, that the struggles to get children to settle down and sleep diminished noticeably. The factory workers who had once sampled chocolate throughout their shifts found that the work felt more tedious without the subtle boost they had grown accustomed to. Productivity, which had been remarkably high during the era of coca-enhanced chocolate, settled to more ordinary levels. The company compensated by improving working conditions in other ways, reducing hours, increasing pay, providing better ventilation and lighting, but the magic that had briefly made factory labor feel slightly less grinding was gone. In parlors and social clubs, the conversations continued, but with less of the electric intensity that had characterized gatherings during the previous decades. Hostesses still served chocolate, and guests still appreciated it, but the evenings proceeded with greater decorum and less spontaneous wit. The chocolate had become what it would remain for the next century, a sweet treat, a moment of pleasure, a taste of luxury accessible to ordinary people, but no longer a subtle catalyst for transformation. The memory of those earlier bars persisted in stories and legends. Grandparents would tell their grandchildren about a time when chocolate had been different, when a single square could make you feel capable of accomplishing twice your normal work. These stories were often met with skepticism or amusement, dismissed as exaggeration or nostalgia, but they contained within them a kernel of truth, a memory of a brief period when American chocolate had possessed qualities that would seem impossible to later generations. World War I provided Hershey bars with a new purpose and a new reputation. The company contracted with the military to produce special ration bars that could withstand extreme temperatures and provide concentrated nutrition to soldiers in the field. These bars, dense and durable and admittedly not particularly delicious, became known as Field Ration D, and they accompanied American troops to the trenches of France and Belgium. Soldiers who had grown up eating Hershey bars as children found comfort in the familiar name, even if the product itself bore little resemblance to the treats they remembered. The war also accelerated changes that were already underway in American food production, with greater emphasis on standardization, safety, and efficiency. The Romantic era of small batch production and secret ingredients gave way to an age of industrial scale and scientific precision. Chocolate became more affordable and more widely available, but also more uniform, more predictable, more thoroughly regulated.
By the 1920s, the Hershey bar had become an American icon, but it was a different product than the one that had launched the company to prominence. The Jazz Age brought new forms of excitement and new substances to provide stimulation, from bathtub gin to the cigarettes that became ubiquitous accessories. Chocolate remained popular, but no longer occupied the unique position it had held in the previous decades, when it had been simultaneously treat and tonic, pleasure and productivity enhancer. The great chocolate debates of the 1910s, when ministers and reformers had warned that confectionery was leading American youth astray, faded from memory. Chocolate became boring in the best possible way, a staple that required no justification or defense, something that parents could give their children without worry, something that could be enjoyed without sparking conversation or controversy. The wild stories of chocolate-fueled all-night work sessions and children who seemed never to tire were retold with amusement, transformed into family legends that seemed to belong more to mythology than to actual history. Modern analysis of those early formulas confirms what the stories suggested, that the coca leaf extract, while present in relatively small quantities, would have had measurable physiological effects. The alkaloids present in the leaves act as stimulants, increasing alertness and reducing fatigue, improving mood and providing a sense of enhanced capability. The amounts present in a typical Hershey bar would not have been overwhelming, nothing like the concentrated products that would later be banned and criminalized, but they would have been enough to be noticeable, especially to children or to adults who consumed multiple bars throughout the day. The workers in the Hershey factory, exposed to chocolate dust and sampling products throughout their shifts, would have received regular doses of these stimulating compounds, which helps explain the remarkable productivity that characterized the facility in those early years and the unusual camaraderie that developed among the workforce. The children eating chocolate after lunch would have found their afternoons transformed in ways their teachers struggled to manage. The socialites serving chocolate at their gatherings would have found conversations taking on an energy and intensity that seemed magical but was actually pharmaceutical. Was this dangerous? By modern standards, the lack of disclosure and the absence of warnings would be considered deeply problematic. Giving children a stimulating substance without their parents' informed consent would be viewed as unconscionable. The workplace exposure of factory employees would trigger regulatory intervention. But the early 20th century operated under different assumptions, with far greater tolerance for experimentation and far less concern about substances that seemed to cause no immediate harm. The people who consumed these early Hershey bars and thrived, or at least believed they were thriving, would have been shocked to learn that their beloved chocolate was controversial or problematic. They experienced it as a blessing, as one of the small miracles of modern industrial society, proof that science and commerce could combine to improve ordinary life.
The energy they felt was real, the enhanced productivity was measurable, the joy they took in their chocolate was genuine. When the formula changed and the coca leaf extract disappeared, many people felt a sense of loss, even if they could not articulate exactly what had changed. The chocolate still tasted good, but it had lost something ineffable, some quality that had made it special. They adapted, as people always do, finding their energy elsewhere or simply accepting that life would proceed at a gentler pace. The brief era when American chocolate had been accidentally pharmaceutical came to an end, not with drama or scandal, but with quiet reformulation and gradual forgetting. The legacy of this period persists in unexpected ways. The association of chocolate with energy and mood improvement, while no longer based on coca leaf content, remains powerful in marketing and popular consciousness. Chocolate is still positioned as a pick-me-up, as comfort food, as something that can make a difficult day feel more manageable, even though the modern product relies entirely on sugar and cocoa for its effects. The myth has outlived the reality, but the myth contains within it the memory of something that was once true. The Hershey Company, for its part, has never made much of this history, understandably preferring to focus on the wholesome, family-friendly image that has served it well for more than a century. The early years when the bars contained coca leaf extract are not featured in corporate histories or museum exhibits. The reformulation is treated as a minor technical adjustment rather than as the end of an era. This silence is perhaps wise, but it also ensures that most people remain unaware of the strange and fascinating chapter in American food history that occurred when chocolate was briefly more than just chocolate. As you lie here in the darkness, perhaps you can imagine what it would have been like to live through that period, to experience chocolate as something slightly magical, to feel the gentle acceleration that came with each bite, to believe that a simple candy bar could make you more productive, more creative, more capable of facing whatever challenges the day might bring. It was an illusion, perhaps, but a compelling one, and for a brief moment in American history, millions of people shared in it together. The factories have changed, the recipes have been perfected and standardized, the regulations have grown stricter and more comprehensive, but somewhere in the collective memory, there remains a whisper of that earlier time, when chocolate bars contained secrets, when dessert was adventure, when the simple act of unwrapping a Hershey bar was the beginning of an afternoon that might take you anywhere. That world is gone now, vanished into history, but it shaped the world we inhabit in ways both obvious and subtle, and its story deserves to be remembered, even as we drift towards sleep, grateful that our own chocolate is simpler, safer, and incapable of keeping us awake all night reconstructing the shed or writing poetry in the margins of our tax returns. Sleep now, knowing that history contains stranger truths than any fiction, that the ordinary objects of daily life often carry extraordinary stories, and that sometimes the most remarkable thing about the past is how recently it was the present, how narrowly we avoided inheriting its chaos, how fortunate we are that some experiments end before they conspire beyond control. Sleep now, knowing that history contains stranger truths than any fiction, that the ordinary objects of daily life often carry extraordinary stories, and that sometimes the most remarkable thing about the past is how recently it was the present, how narrowly we avoided inheriting its chaos, how fortunate we are that some experiments end before they conspire beyond control. The chocolate bars of today are blessings in their boringness, perfect in their predictability, and we can enjoy them without reservation or concern, without wondering whether this square will be the one that keeps us awake until dawn, rearranging furniture and alphabetizing spice racks, and considering whether we might actually be capable of learning the piano by morning. Dream sweetly of simpler times and safer treats, of a world where chocolate has been thoroughly domesticated, where the only thing it stimulates is pleasure, where the only thing it enhances is the moment itself, pure and uncomplicated and exactly as sweet as it promises to be, nothing more and blessedly nothing less, carrying us gently toward morning with no unexpected detours into productivity or revelation, just rest and restoration and the quiet comfort of knowing that when we wake, the world will be exactly as mundane and manageable as we left it, which is all anyone really needs from a bedtime snack, which is everything we should hope for as we surrender to sleep and let the stories of the past fade into dreams where they belong, where they can be as wild and energetic as they wish without disturbing our necessary rest, our earned and precious peace. The decades that followed the Great Reformulation brought changes that rippled through American culture in ways both visible and invisible, shaping attitudes toward food and pleasure and the boundaries between medicine and indulgence. The 1930s arrived with economic collapse and dust storms and bread lines stretching around city blocks, and in this desperate landscape, chocolate became something different again. No longer an energizing miracle, but a small, affordable comfort, a penny's worth of sweetness in a world that had grown bitter and uncertain. Children of the Depression era knew Hershey bars as rare treats saved for special occasions, birthday gifts wrapped carefully in newspaper, rewards for good grades or completed chores. The bars were smaller now. The price held steady, but the product had shrunk to match the diminished circumstances of the times. Families divided single bars into careful portions, making them last through an entire week. And the memory of an era when people had eaten chocolate casually, even wastefully, seemed to belong to a different civilization entirely. The factory in Pennsylvania continued operating through those difficult years, providing employment when jobs were scarce, maintaining production even as demand fluctuated wildly. Milton Hershey, now an elderly man, refused to lay off workers, instead finding projects to keep them busy during slow periods, building parks and schools and infrastructure for the town that bore his name. The paternalistic impulse that had always characterized his business philosophy deepened during the Depression, as he sought to shield his employees from the worst effects of economic catastrophe. The chocolate that emerged from the factory during these years was consistent and reliable, manufactured according to specifications that had been refined through decades of experience, each bar virtually identical to every other bar, a uniformity that would have been impossible in the earlier era of experimental ingredients and variable quality control. The modernization that had begun with regulatory pressure continued through economic necessity, as efficiency became paramount and waste became unthinkable. World War II brought new challenges and new opportunities, with Hershey once again producing special ration bars for the military, these versions even more durable and calorie-dense than their predecessors, designed to survive jungle heat and Arctic cold, to provide maximum nutrition in minimum space. The tropical bar and the ration bar became legendary among soldiers, not for their taste, which was generally agreed to be somewhere between unpleasant and barely tolerable, but for their reliability and their connection to home. A soldier crouched in a foxhole on some Pacific island, eating his daily ration bar, might remember the Hershey bars of his childhood, the ones his mother had packed in his school lunch, the ones he had bought with his allowance at the corner store, and in that memory find comfort, even if the current product bore little resemblance to those earlier treats. The chocolate became a symbol of the American abundance that soldiers were fighting to preserve, a tangible reminder of the civilian life waiting for them if they survived. The women who worked in the Hershey factory during the war years, replacing the men who had gone to fight, developed their own relationships with the product they manufactured, taking pride in knowing that their labor was supporting the war effort, that each bar they wrapped might provide sustenance to a brother or husband or son. The factory ran constantly, 3 shifts around the clock, and the town of Hershey itself took on the character of a home front installation, dedicated entirely to the production of chocolate for a world at war. When peace finally arrived and the soldiers returned home and the economy began its long post-war expansion, chocolate entered yet another phase of its American journey. The 1950s brought prosperity and suburbs and television, and Hershey bars became integrated into the new consumer culture in ways that would have astonished the company founders. Supermarkets replaced corner stores, advertising moved from print to broadcast, and chocolate was marketed not as medicine or energy or even a special treat, but as everyday indulgence, something ordinary families could afford without thought or hesitation. The children of the baby boom grew up with chocolate as a constant presence, available in vending machines and checkout aisles, given out freely at Halloween and Valentine's Day and Easter, so ubiquitous that it lost any sense of being precious or remarkable. These children had no memory of a time when chocolate had been different, when it had possessed qualities beyond simple sweetness, and the stories their grandparents told about the old days seemed like fairy tales, exaggerated and unbelievable. Yet the stories persisted, passed down through families like heirlooms, transformed in the telling but retaining their essential strangeness. A grandmother might mention casually that chocolate used to give you real energy, not like now, and her granddaughter would nod politely without really understanding, assuming this was just another example of the way old people always insisted that everything had been better in their youth. The truth was more complicated, stranger, and far more interesting than simple nostalgia. In universities and research laboratories, scientists who studied the history of food and drug regulation occasionally encountered references to coca leaf extract in chocolate, and these discoveries prompted papers and dissertations and quiet academic debates about the ethics of that earlier era. Some researchers argued that the people who consumed those early chocolate bars had been unwitting participants in a vast, uncontrolled experiment, that their consent had not been meaningfully informed, that modern standards would never permit such casual inclusion of psychoactive substances in food products. Others countered that the historical context mattered, that judging the past by present standards was anachronistic and unfair, that the people of the early 20th century had made reasonable decisions based on the knowledge available to them, that the amounts of coca alkaloids present in chocolate bars had been genuinely small and the risks genuinely minimal. These debates never reached the public consciousness, remaining confined to academic journals and conferences, but they demonstrated that the strange history of American chocolate retained its capacity to provoke thought and controversy even a century later. The Hershey Company itself, now a vast multinational corporation, maintained archives that documented its history in meticulous detail, but access to certain materials remained restricted, particularly those relating to the early formulations and the gradual elimination of coca leaf extract. Corporate lawyers worried about liability, about whether admission that the company had once included stimulants in products marketed to children might expose them to lawsuits or regulatory action, and so the official histories remained carefully sanitized, mentioning botanical ingredients only in the vaguest terms. Independent historians and journalists who attempted to investigate this period encountered obstacles, finding that many records had been lost or destroyed, that witnesses who might have provided first-hand testimony had long since died, that the documentary evidence was fragmentary and often ambiguous. The full story proved elusive, cobbled together from fragments of advertising copy and medical journals and congressional testimony and the fading memories of a vanishing generation. What emerged from these scattered sources was a portrait of an era characterized by optimism and ignorance in equal measure, when the potential of science seemed limitless and the risks seemed manageable, when progress was assumed to be inevitable and beneficial, when the idea that a chocolate bar might be improved by the addition of coca leaf extract seemed no more controversial than adding vanilla or almonds. The people of that time were not reckless or irresponsible, they were simply operating within a different framework of understanding, working with incomplete knowledge and doing their best to navigate a rapidly changing world. The coca leaf itself, vilified and banned in later decades, possessed a complex history that extended far beyond its use in American chocolate. For thousands of years, indigenous peoples of South America had cultivated and consumed the plant, developing sophisticated traditions around its use, understanding its effects and limitations in ways that European and American users never quite achieved. The coca leaf in its natural form, chewed or brewed as tea, produced effects that were mild and manageable, providing endurance and focus without the intense highs and crashes associated with concentrated extracts. When Europeans encountered coca during the colonial period, they recognized its potential value but failed to appreciate the cultural knowledge that had governed its traditional use. They began experimenting with concentration and extraction, seeking to isolate the active compounds and produce more potent preparations, and in doing so, they created products that bore little resemblance to the original plant. The coca wine popularized in 19th century Europe, the coca tonics sold in American pharmacies, the cocaine that would eventually be synthesized in pure form, all represented attempts to improve upon nature that instead created new problems. The decision to add coca leaf extract to chocolate can be understood in this context, as part of a broader pattern of experimentation with botanical substances, an attempt to enhance a popular product by incorporating ingredients associated with energy and vitality. The manufacturers likely believed they were offering consumers genuine value, giving them chocolate that not only tasted good but also provided functional benefits. And the consumers who purchased these products generally seemed satisfied with the results.
The question of addiction, which would become central to later debates about coca-derived substances, remained poorly understood during this early period. Addiction science was in its infancy, with researchers only beginning to recognize that certain substances could create dependency, and that this dependency could be physiological rather than merely moral weakness. The amounts of coca alkaloids present in chocolate bars were probably insufficient to create true addiction in most users, but they would have been enough to create habituation, a preference for the product based on the subtle effects it produced. People who regularly consumed these chocolate bars might have found themselves eating more than they initially planned, reaching for another square when they felt their energy flagging, structuring their days around the timing of their chocolate consumption. This behavior would not have seemed alarming to them or to observers. Chocolate was food, and eating food when you felt hungry or tired was normal. The fact that the chocolate was subtly altering their neurochemistry, providing small, regular doses of stimulant compounds, remained invisible to everyone involved. When the formula changed and the coca leaf extract disappeared, some consumers would have experienced something resembling withdrawal, though they likely would not have recognized it as such. They might have felt more tired than usual, less motivated, slightly irritable, and they might have eaten more chocolate trying to recapture the feeling they remembered, not understanding that the product itself had fundamentally changed. Over time, they would have adapted, their bodies adjusting to the absence of the stimulant, but the memory of how chocolate used to make them feel would have lingered. These personal experiences, multiplied across millions of consumers, created the collective memory that transformed into legend and myth. The stories about chocolate giving people extraordinary energy, while exaggerated in the retelling, were rooted in genuine physiological effects. The children who seemed never to tire, the workers who could labor longer shifts, the socialites whose conversations sparkled with unusual wit, all were experiencing real phenomena, even if they misunderstood the source. The nostalgia that later generations felt for those earlier chocolate bars was not entirely misplaced. The product genuinely had been different, had possessed qualities that the modern version lacked. But the nostalgia was also dangerous because it romanticized an era of inadequate regulation and insufficient knowledge when consumers trusted manufacturers to keep them safe, but manufacturers lacked the scientific understanding to do so reliably. The triumph of the Pure Food and Drug Act and the regulatory framework that grew from it was not that it eliminated all risk from food products, but that it established the principle that consumers had a right to know what they were eating, that transparency was not optional but mandatory, that manufacturers could not hide behind trade secrets when those secrets involved substances that affected human health. The reformulation of Hershey bars represented a small victory in a much larger struggle to make the industrial food system accountable to the people it served. Yet something was lost in this transition, a certain innocence or perhaps naivety, a faith that progress meant continuous improvement without trade-offs or complications. The people who ate those early coca-enhanced chocolate bars believed they were experiencing the benefits of modern science, proof that industrial society could deliver not just efficiency and abundance, but genuine enhancement of human capability. When the enhancement proved illusory, or at least problematic, it shook that faith in ways that extended far beyond chocolate. The decades that followed saw increasing skepticism about food additives and industrial processing, a growing movement toward natural and organic products, a desire to return to simpler ways of eating that predated the chemical and industrial transformations of the 20th century. This movement often romanticized the past, imagining a time of pure, wholesome food that had never really existed, but it also represented a legitimate response to the realization that modern food production involved countless invisible choices and additives and processes that consumers could neither see nor control. Chocolate became caught up in these debates, with some advocates praising dark chocolate for its antioxidants and others warning about sugar content and processed ingredients. The Hershey bar, once a symbol of American innovation and prosperity, became for some a symbol of everything wrong with industrial food, overly sweet and artificial and disconnected from the cacao beans that were its ultimate source. The company responded by diversifying its product line, offering premium chocolates and organic options, trying to appeal to changing consumer preferences while maintaining its core mass-market business.
Through all these transformations, the basic Hershey bar endured, stubbornly unchanged in most respects, still wrapped in its distinctive brown and silver packaging, still priced affordably, still available in every convenience store and supermarket in the nation. For millions of Americans, it remained the default chocolate, the baseline against which all other chocolates were measured, carrying with it associations of childhood and nostalgia and comfort that had nothing to do with its ingredients or manufacturing process and everything to do with memory and emotion. The story of coca leaf extract in early Hershey bars might seem like a peculiar historical footnote, interesting but ultimately inconsequential, but it actually reveals something profound about the relationship between technology and society, about the unintended consequences of innovation, about the difficulty of knowing when we are improving things and when we are simply creating new problems. The manufacturers who added coca to chocolate believed they were making a better product, and by certain measures they were correct, but they failed to anticipate how regulation would change and how public attitudes towards stimulants would evolve. In hindsight, it seems obvious that putting coca derivatives in chocolate marketed to children was problematic, but hindsight always simplifies and clarifies in ways that distort historical reality. The people making those decisions were not villains or fools, they were business people and chemists trying to succeed in a competitive market, using ingredients that were legal and socially acceptable, following practices that were standard throughout their industry. They were also prisoners of their era's assumptions about safety and efficacy, unable to see the problems that would become obvious to later generations. This is perhaps the most important lesson of the coca chocolate era, that our own assumptions about what is safe and beneficial are equally contingent and limited, that future generations will look back at our practices with the same mixture of incomprehension and judgment that we direct toward the past. We are making decisions now about food additives and processing methods and agricultural practices that may prove just as problematic as adding coca to chocolate, but we cannot know which decisions will be vindicated and which will be condemned. The only certainty is that chocolate will endure, adapting to new regulations and preferences, continuing to provide sweetness and comfort to new generations who will know nothing of the strange history we have explored tonight. They will eat their Hershey bars with the same innocent pleasure that children always have, unaware that the simple act of eating chocolate was once far more complicated and controversial, and perhaps that is as it should be. Some knowledge is burdensome, some history is better left undisturbed, and the fact that chocolate no longer contains coca derivatives is probably something to celebrate rather than mourn. The brief era when dessert doubled as mild stimulant makes for interesting storytelling, but the world we inhabit now, where chocolate is simply chocolate, is safer and more transparent and ultimately more just. As you lie here in the darkness, perhaps you can appreciate the strange journey that brought us to this moment. The peculiar path that chocolate traveled from Incan ceremonial offering to Victorian medicine to industrial commodity to regulated food product. Each transformation reflected the values and knowledge of its era. Each left its mark on the product and the people who consumed it, and together they created a history far richer and stranger than most people imagine when they unwrap a candy bar. The factories still hum with production, the stores still stock their shelves, the children still trade chocolate for treasures in schoolyards, and the great wheel of commerce and consumption continues turning. But underneath the familiar surface lies this hidden history, this secret ingredient that briefly made American chocolate into something remarkable and problematic and utterly unique. Sleep now with the knowledge that you have glimpsed something most people never discover. A chapter of history that was deliberately forgotten, but deserves to be remembered, not to condemn or celebrate, but simply to understand. The past was not better or worse than the present, merely different, and in that difference we find perspective on our own moment and perhaps wisdom about the choices we face. Dream of chocolate factories and coca leaves, of children running endlessly through sunlit afternoons, of workers humming as they wrap 10,000 bars, of a world that was briefly more energetic than it had any right to be. Dream of Milton Hershey watching his empire grow, never quite admitting what made his chocolate special. Dream of all the small transformations that accumulate into history, the invisible changes that reshape everything while seeming to change nothing.
Dream of chocolate factories and coca leaves, of children running endlessly through sunlit afternoons, of workers humming as they wrap 10,000 bars, of a world that was briefly more energetic than it had any right to be. Dream of Milton Hershey watching his empire grow, never quite admitting what made his chocolate special. Dream of all the small transformations that accumulate into history, the invisible changes that reshape everything while seeming to change nothing.
And when you wake, reach for your chocolate without worry or concern, knowing it contains nothing more than it promises, nothing less than you deserve, just sweetness and comfort, and the simple pleasure of something delicious at the end of a long day. That is enough. That has always been enough. That is everything chocolate needs to be, now that we have learned the lessons of its complicated past and carry them forward into a more careful present, where treats are just treats, and medicine is clearly labeled, and the boundary between them is carefully patrolled. The story is finished now, the history told, the secrets revealed. All that remains is sleep, deep and dreamless and restorative, carrying you through the night hours toward morning, when the world will begin again, predictable and comprehensible, free from the chaos of coca-enhanced chocolate and all the other strange experiments that characterized America's journey toward the modern age. Rest well, knowing the past cannot harm you, that the chocolate of today is gentler than the chocolate of yesterday, that progress sometimes means subtraction rather than addition, that the most important ingredient in any food is trust, and that trust requires honesty that took generations to establish, but must be maintained vigilantly if we are to avoid repeating the errors of those who came before us. Well-meaning but blind to consequences, we can see clearly only because we stand on the far side of history, looking backward with the invaluable gift of knowing how the story ended, how the wild, energetic era gave way to something calmer and safer and less likely to keep anyone awake past their bedtime, which is precisely where we need to be now, drifting downward into sleep, letting go of the strange tale, surrendering to the darkness and the quiet, and the blessed relief of not needing to think or analyze or remember anything at all until morning calls us back. Tonight we drift into the shadowed corners of history, into rooms where the air still carries the faint scent of beeswax and yesterday's tea, where footsteps echo on cold stone floors, and where thousands of young women lived lives hidden behind velvet curtains and polished brass. This is the world of the Victorian maid, the invisible hands that kept grand mansions running, the silent witnesses to secrets, scandals, and the daily theater of upper-class life. These were not the romanticized figures of period dramas, but real women who woke before dawn, worked until their hands bled, and dreamed of something better while scrubbing someone else's floors. So before you settle deeper into your pillows, if you enjoy drifting through these forgotten stories of history, consider joining us for more tales from the past. Now, let the world outside fade away. Close your eyes if you wish, and step with me into a mansion where the clocks tick slowly, the scares creak with memory, and the ghosts of 1,000 maids still move through the darkness, carrying their burdens with quiet grace. The year is 1875, and you are waking in a narrow attic room where frost patterns the inside of the window, and your breath makes clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. The maid's bell has not yet rung, but your body knows the rhythm so deeply that you wake anyway, pulled from dreams by the internal clock that servitude has wound tight within you. Around you, other maids sleep in their narrow beds, curled against the cold, their faces peaceful in these final moments before the day claims them. You move carefully in the darkness, feeling for your uniform laid out the night before, still stiff with starch, still holding the shape of yesterday's labor. The floorboards are ice beneath your bare feet, and somewhere far below you can hear the first stirrings of the house, the distant clank of the kitchen range being lit, the soft footsteps of the scullery maid who rises even earlier than you, condemned to the lowest rung of the household ladder. There is no mirror in this room, nothing to reflect your face or remind you of your individuality. You dress by feel and memory, fingers working buttons and hooks with practiced efficiency,
tying your apron strings with a knot you could accomplish in your sleep, which sometimes you have. Your hair must be tamed, pinned back so severely that your scalp aches, because loose hair is slovenly, and slovenly is the worst accusation that can be leveled at a maid. You are creating the uniform self, the invisible servant who will move through the mansion like a shadow, present but never truly seen, essential but never acknowledged. Outside the attic window, the city is still dark, gas lamps flickering in the streets far below, and you wonder, not for the first time, about the lives of those who sleep in soft beds with warm blankets, who wake to breakfast brought on trays, who have never felt the bite of cold water on raw hands at 5 in the morning. Down the back stairs you go, moving with the careful silence that has become second nature, because noise is transgression, and transgression means trouble. The stairs are narrow and steep, designed to hide the servants' movements from the family's view, and you have learned every creaking board, every loose nail, every place where the banister wobbles dangerously. These are the arteries of the house that the family never sees, the hidden passages and back corridors where the real work happens, where the machinery of domestic life grinds on endlessly. In the kitchen, warmth from the range is beginning to spread, and the cook is already at work, her face flushed, her hands moving with the confidence of long practice. She nods at you, a brief acknowledgement, and you take your place in the complex choreography of the morning, each servant knowing their role, each task completed in a sequence as precise as any military operation. The fires must be lit in every room before the family wakes, and this is your first task, the one that sets the stage for everything that follows. You fill the coal scuttle, feeling the weight of it pull at your shoulders, and begin your rounds through the sleeping house. Each fireplace has its own personality, its own quirks and demands. The drawing room fire draws well, but eats coal like a hungry beast. The master's study requires careful arrangement of kindling, or it smokes and fills the room with acrid clouds. The nursery fire must be gentle, warm, but not too hot, because children are delicate and must be protected even from the heat that comforts them. You kneel before each hearth, your hands blackening with coal dust, your knees aching against hard floors, and you build these small infernos that will make the mansion habitable, that will drive back the cold and create the illusion of comfort that the family takes entirely for granted. As you work, the house begins to wake around you. You hear doors opening on the floors above, the soft murmur of voices, the rustle of fabric as the family stirs in their beds and rings for their morning tea. The bells begin their symphony, each one a summons, each one a command that must be answered immediately. You have learned to distinguish between them, to know by the pitch and duration which room is calling, which member of the family requires attention. The mistress's bell is imperious and sharp, the master's is brief and businesslike. The children's bells ring with chaotic enthusiasm, as if pulling the cord is a game rather than a communication. You move faster now, your carefully built routine disrupted by the unpredictable demands of those upstairs, and you feel the familiar tension building in your chest, the fear that you will be too slow, that you will fail to meet expectations, that today will be the day when your inadequacy is finally exposed. Hot water must be carried upstairs, heavy jugs that slosh and threaten to spill with every step, and you have become an expert in balance and momentum, tilting the jug just so to prevent disaster. The hallways are still dim, lit only by the pale light filtering through windows, and the family portraits watch you pass with their painted eyes, generations of privilege observing the latest in a long line of servants who have carried water and coal and trays through these same corridors. You wonder sometimes if the faces in the paintings remember the names of those who served them, or if servants were always invisible, always interchangeable, always just the help. In each bedroom, you place the jug carefully, making no sound, disturbing nothing, and then you withdraw like smoke, leaving no trace of your presence except the water that steams gently in its porcelain prison. The chamber pots are waiting, and this is the task that no one speaks of, the necessary horror that defines the reality of Victorian plumbing, or rather the lack of it. You steel yourself, adopting the blank expression that you wear like armor, and you collect these vessels of human waste with as much dignity as you can muster. There is an art to carrying them without spilling, without drawing attention, without allowing your face to betray any reaction to the contents. You have learned to breathe through your mouth, to think of other things, to transport your mind elsewhere while your body completes this degrading task. Down to the scullery you go, to empty and rinse and scrub, and you are grateful that at least this work is done in relative privacy, away from the eyes of the family, in a space where you can drop the pretense of serene competence and simply grimace at the unpleasantness of it all. But there is no time to linger in disgust, because the morning is advancing rapidly now, and breakfast must be prepared and served. In the kitchen, organized chaos reigns as the cook orchestrates the production of eggs and toast and bacon, of tea brewed to exact specifications, of porridge that must be neither too thick nor too thin. You assist where needed, carrying plates to the dining room, ensuring that everything is arranged with geometric precision, that the marmalade is in its proper place, and the butter dish is filled, and the napkins are folded just so. The family descend at their leisure, never hurrying, never acknowledging the hours of labor that have preceded this moment, and they seat themselves at the table with the casual confidence of those who have never doubted that breakfast will appear, hot and perfect, exactly when they desire it.
You stand by the sideboard, hands folded, eyes downcast, a statue in black and white, and you wait for the inevitable requests. More tea, fresh toast, another serving of eggs, the butter passed, the jam retrieved, the constantly shifting demands that turn breakfast service into an endurance test. The master reads his newspaper, the rustling of pages the only sound besides the soft clink of silverware on china. The mistress nibbles at her food with the delicate disinterest of someone who has never known true hunger. The children squirm and complain and push food around their plates, and you watch them waste more in one meal than you might eat in a week, and you feel nothing, because feeling is dangerous, because resentment is the first step toward insubordination, and insubordination is the first step toward unemployment. When breakfast is finally finished and the family disperses to their various occupations, you clear the table with swift efficiency, stacking plates, gathering silverware, collecting the debris of the meal. Back to the kitchen you go, where the scullery maid is already elbow-deep in washing up, and you add your burden to hers, knowing that your own hands will soon be submerged in water so hot it scalds, scrubbing at grease and food residue until your knuckles are raw. But this is the rhythm of the day, the endless cycle of preparation and service and cleaning, and you have learned not to think about how many more hours remain, how many more tasks must be completed before you can finally rest. The house must be cleaned, every surface dusted, every floor swept, every piece of brass polished until it gleams. You move through the rooms with your feather duster and your cloths, erasing the evidence of human occupation, restoring the mansion to its pristine state. Dust is eternal, an enemy that can never be truly defeated, only temporarily subdued, and you have developed a philosophical relationship with it, accepting that tomorrow it will return, that this battle is one you will fight every day for as long as you remain in service. The drawing room is particularly challenging, filled with delicate objects and uncomfortable furniture, with surfaces that seem designed to collect dust and display it prominently. You dust the mantelpiece, the side tables, the countless decorative objects whose purpose remains mysterious to you, and you try not to think about the fact that no one will notice your work unless you fail to do it. Polishing is meditation and torment combined. The repetitive motion of cloth against metal, the gradual emergence of shine from tarnish. Silver must be polished weekly, a task that leaves your hands black and your arms aching, but the butler inspects each piece with the intensity of a jeweler examining diamonds, and anything less than perfection is unacceptable. You polish candlesticks and tea services and flatware, and you wonder who decided that silver was the appropriate material for household goods. What sadist looked at a soft metal that tarnishes constantly and thought, yes, this is what we should eat from? But yours is not to question why. Yours is only to polish and scrub and make everything shine as if it were new, as if the passage of time and the touch of human hands had left no mark at all. The stairs are everywhere, unavoidable, the bane of every servant's existence.
Victorian mansions seem to have been designed by architects who believed that horizontal space was somehow cheating, that true grandeur could only be achieved through vertical excess. You climb and descend dozens of times each day, carrying coal scuttles and water jugs and linens, and your legs burn with the effort. Your knees protest with increasing volume as the day progresses. The grand staircase is for show, wide and carpeted and lined with portraits, but the back stairs are your realm, narrow and steep and treacherous, with steps that vary in height and width as if crafted by someone who had never actually used stairs before. You have stumbled more times than you can count, have caught yourself on banisters, have said prayers of gratitude that you have never actually fallen, because a fall would mean injury, and injury would mean inability to work, and inability to work would mean dismissal without references. Midday brings a brief respite, a chance to catch your breath and perhaps even sit for a few minutes in the servants' hall. Here, the hierarchy is visible and enforced, with the butler and housekeeper at the head of the table, the senior staff arranged by rank, and the junior maids clustered at the far end like afterthoughts. The meal is simple, often the leftovers from the family's breakfast, and you eat quickly, knowing that the afternoon will bring its own demands. Conversation is subdued, careful, because the wrong words overheard can lead to trouble, and trust is a commodity carefully rationed in a household where everyone depends on everyone else, but no one is truly safe. You exchange glances with the other maids, silent communication that speaks volumes, and you take comfort in the knowledge that you are not alone in this, that others understand the particular exhaustion that comes from being constantly visible and constantly invisible at the same time. The afternoon stretches ahead, filled with more cleaning, more fires to tend, more bells to answer. The mistress receives callers in the drawing room, and you serve tea with mechanical precision, placing cups and saucers and plates of biscuits, and you become part of the furniture, a moving piece of the room's decoration that the ladies ignore completely while they gossip about people you will never meet and events to which you will never be invited. You hear fragments of conversation, scandal and speculation delivered in hushed tones, and you file these away in your memory, because information is currency below stairs, because knowing the family's business makes you valuable, makes you essential, even as it reminds you how separate your world is from theirs. As the light begins to fade, preparations for dinner begin, and this is the most complex operation of the day, requiring coordination between kitchen and dining room, between cook and butler, between all the servants who must work together to create the illusion of effortless abundance. The table is set with mathematical precision, each piece of silverware placed exactly so, each glass positioned at the correct angle, the whole arrangement a testament to order and control. You help carry dishes from the kitchen, hot plates of food that must be delivered at exactly the right temperature, and you stand ready to serve, to pour wine, to clear plates, to respond to every gesture and glance from those seated at the table. Dinner service is theater, a performance in which you are both stagehand and prop, and you have learned your role so thoroughly that you could do it in your sleep, which is fortunate because by this point in the day you are so tired that you are practically sleepwalking anyway. When dinner is finally over and the family retires to the drawing room for their after-dinner entertainments, you face the mountain of washing up, the seemingly endless parade of dishes and glasses and serving pieces that must all be cleaned and dried and put away. Your hands, already raw from the morning's labors, plunge once more into hot water, and you scrub mechanically, your mind elsewhere, thinking of home perhaps, or of the bed that awaits you, or of nothing at all, just blessed emptiness. The kitchen is warm and steamy, and the other maids work alongside you, and sometimes someone hums a tune or tells a joke, and for a moment the burden lightens, the camaraderie of shared suffering making everything slightly more bearable. But the day is not over, not yet, because the fires must be banked for the night, the lamps must be extinguished, the house must be prepared for sleep. You make your final rounds, checking that everything is secure, that no candles are left burning, that all is in order for the morning. The mansion in darkness is a different place, full of shadows and strange sounds, and you move through it with a mixture of familiarity and unease, because you know every room, and yet you never truly belong here. You are always a visitor in someone else's domain. Up the back stairs one last time you climb, each step an effort now.
and you reach the attic room where you began, where the other maids are already preparing for bed, changing out of their uniforms with relief, letting down their hair, becoming themselves again for the few hours until the morning bell summons them back into service. You lie in your narrow bed, the thin blanket pulled up to your chin, and you feel the ache in every muscle, the throb of your feet, the sting of your hands. Around you, the house settles into its nighttime groans and whispers, and you drift toward sleep with the knowledge that tomorrow will be exactly the same. Another day of bells and stairs and endless tasks. Another day of being invisible and essential. Another day of surviving in this strange world where you live in a mansion but own nothing. Where you are surrounded by luxury but touch it only to clean it. Where you are part of a family that does not know your name. And yet, in the darkness, you hold on to the small victories, the tasks completed, the disasters avoided, the moments of laughter shared with the other maids, and you tell yourself that this is temporary, that someday things will be different, that someday you will have a life of your own, a home of your own, a name that belongs to you and not to your position. The dreams come softly, fragments of memory and hope tangled together, and in your dreams you are sometimes home, sometimes somewhere you have never been, sometimes someone other than a maid in a black dress with a white apron. In your dreams you are free, and the bells cannot reach you, and your hands do not hurt, and you wake when you choose to wake, not when duty demands it.
But even in sleep, part of you remains alert, listening for the bell, ready to respond, because you are a Victorian maid, and you have learned that you are never truly off duty, never truly safe, never truly your own. This is the hidden world behind the grand facades, the reality that visitors never see, the labor that makes leisure possible, the sacrifice that enables comfort. This is the world of the pretty maids, who were neither particularly pretty nor particularly celebrated, who worked until their bodies failed and their spirits bent, who held families and households together with their bleeding hands and breaking backs. And as you finally surrender to exhausted sleep, as the mansion falls quiet around you, as the clocks tick toward another dawn, you are already dreaming of the morning, already preparing yourself for the bell that will ring too soon, already marshaling your strength for another day in service. Because this is your life now, this is what you do, this is who you have become in this house of secrets and silence, in this mansion where you are everything and nothing, where you see all and are seen by none, where you are the invisible force that keeps the visible world spinning. Sleep well, tired maid, for tomorrow the bells will ring again, and you will rise again, and you will do it all again, because survival is endurance, and endurance is victory, and sometimes the greatest triumph is simply making it through another day with your dignity intact and your hope still flickering, however faintly, in the darkness. The secret language of the servants is spoken not with words but with glances, with the arch of an eyebrow, with the tiniest movement of lips that might be a smile or might be a warning. You have learned this language out of necessity, because speech in the presence of the family is forbidden except in direct response to questions, and even then your words must be carefully measured, respectful, revealing nothing of your own thoughts or feelings. So you communicate in silence, a raised eyebrow asking if the other maid has seen the missing teaspoon, a slight nod confirming that yes, the housekeeper is in a foul mood today and everyone should be extra careful, a quick shake of the head warning that the mistress is approaching and all conversation must cease immediately. This silent vocabulary is rich and complex, developed over generations of servants who found ways to maintain connection and solidarity despite the rules designed to keep them isolated and subservient. In the servants' hall, when the day's work is finally done and you gather for the brief evening respite, the atmosphere changes. Here, below stairs, in the domain that belongs to you and your fellow servants, words flow more freely, though always with an undercurrent of caution, because you never know who might carry tales to the housekeeper, who might betray a confidence for the reward of favor with those in authority.
You learn quickly who can be trusted and who cannot. You develop alliances and friendships within the strict hierarchy that governs servant life, and you navigate the complex social structure with the same care you bring to navigating the mansion's staircases. The cook is queen of the kitchen, her word law, her temper legendary, and you have learned to stay on her good side through small acts of deference and helpfulness.
The butler rules the male servants and oversees the formal service. And though you rarely interact with him directly, you are always aware of his presence, his standards, his ability to make or break a servant's reputation with a few words to the master. The housekeeper is your immediate superior, the one who assigns your tasks and inspects your work and determines whether you are meeting the household's exacting standards. She is a woman who has risen through the ranks of service, who understands every job because she has done every job, and she expects perfection because she herself is perfect, or at least she presents that facade to the world. You both fear and respect her because she has power over your continued employment, but also because she represents what you might become if you survive long enough in service, if you prove yourself capable and reliable and willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of the household. Sometimes you watch her and wonder if she was ever young like you, if she ever dreamed of something beyond this life, if she ever resented the endless demands and the thankless labor, or if she has so thoroughly internalized the values of service that she no longer remembers any other way of being. Among the other maids, there is a complex mix of competition and cooperation. You compete for the better assignments, for the approval of those in authority, for the opportunity to advance within the household hierarchy. But you also depend on each other for survival, for help with tasks that are too difficult to manage alone, for companionship in a world where you are otherwise isolated from normal social life.
The other maids know things about you that no one else knows. They have seen you at your worst moments, exhausted and crying and ready to give up, and they have offered comfort and encouragement, have shared their own struggles, have reminded you that you are not alone in this. These friendships are complicated by the fact that any of you might be dismissed at any time, that the maid who is your closest confidant today might be gone tomorrow, her bed stripped and her few possessions carried away, leaving only the memory of her presence and the increased burden of work distributed among those who remain. There are also the male servants, the footmen and the hall boys, and occasionally the valet and the groom, and their presence introduces another layer of complexity to life below stairs. Romance is officially forbidden, any involvement between servants grounds for immediate dismissal, and yet human nature persists despite the rules. You have seen the glances exchanged between the kitchen maid and the second footman, have noticed how the laundry maid always seems to find an excuse to be in the servants' hall when the hall boy is there, have been aware of the whispered conversations and the quickly stifled laughter that suggests something more than friendship. You yourself have felt the flutter of attraction, the dangerous pull towards someone who understands your life because he lives it too. But you have learned to suppress these feelings, to focus on survival rather than romance, because the risk is too great and the consequences too severe. The household runs on routines and rituals, on the precise repetition of tasks at specific times, and any deviation from these patterns is noticed and questioned.
You rise at the same time every day, you follow the same sequence of duties, you eat at the same times and in the same places, and this predictability is both comforting and suffocating. It means you always know what is expected of you, but it also means there is no spontaneity, no freedom, no space for personal choice. Your life is not your own, it belongs to the household, and every moment is accounted for, every action prescribed. Even your rare days off, the precious few hours per month when you are allowed to leave the mansion, are circumscribed by rules about when you must return and what conduct is expected of you. You are never truly free, even in your free time, because you are always aware that you represent the household, that your behavior reflects on your employer, that any misstep could result in punishment or dismissal. And yet, within these constraints, you find small spaces for yourself, small acts of rebellion and independence that help you maintain your sense of self. You might pause for an extra moment at a window, looking out at the world beyond the mansion walls and imagining what it would be like to walk freely through those streets. You might slip an extra spoonful of sugar into your tea when the housekeeper is not looking, a tiny act of defiance that makes you feel briefly powerful.
You might daydream while performing repetitive tasks, letting your mind wander to places you have never been and lives you will never live. And these mental escapes sustain you through the long hours of labor.
You write letters home when you can afford the postage, carefully crafting words that will reassure your family that you are well without revealing the full truth of your circumstances, because you do not want them to worry, and because you need them to believe that your sacrifice, leaving home to work in service, was worth it. The passage of time in the mansion is marked not by calendar dates, but by the rhythm of the seasons and the annual events that define the household's year. Spring brings the dreaded spring cleaning, when every room must be taken apart and scrubbed and put back together, when curtains are washed and carpets are beaten and windows are polished until they are invisible. Summer brings garden parties and the additional work of serving outdoors, of carrying trays across lawns and managing linens in the heat, and dealing with insects and weather and all the complications of moving the household's operations beyond the familiar walls. Autumn brings the harvest of the kitchen garden and the endless work of preserving and pickling and preparing for winter, and you spend long hours helping the cook transform fresh produce into jars and bottles that will sustain the household through the cold months. Winter brings darkness and cold and the constant battle to keep fires burning and rooms warm, and you burn through coal and wood at an alarming rate, always carrying fuel, always tending flames, always fighting back the chill that seeps through walls and windows and seems to settle in your very bones. Christmas is both the best and worst time of year in the mansion. Best because there is a festive atmosphere, because the family is often in good spirits, because there are special foods and decorations, and sometimes even small gifts for the servants.
Worst because the amount of work increases exponentially because every surface must be decorated and every meal must be special and guests arrive and must be accommodated and served, and you work from before dawn until long after midnight, so exhausted that you can barely remember your own name. The mansion is transformed with evergreen boughs and ribbons and candles, and it does look magical, you have to admit, even as you are the one climbing ladders to hang decorations and cleaning up pine needles and ensuring that nothing catches fire. The family celebrates while you serve, and then, when they finally retire, you collapse in the servants' hall with the other staff, and someone produces a bottle of something warming, and you all drink a toast to survival, to making it through another Christmas, to the fact that you are still employed and still alive, and still capable of finding moments of joy, even in the midst of exhaustion. The hidden dangers of service are many and varied. There is the physical danger of heavy lifting and hot water and sharp knives and fires that can burn and stairs that can break bones. There is the danger of illness because you work in close quarters with others and diseases spread rapidly, and if you become too sick to work, you are a burden that the household cannot afford to carry. There is the danger of unwanted attention from male members of the household or their guests because you are vulnerable and powerless and have no recourse if someone decides to take advantage of your position. You have heard the whispered stories of maids who were dismissed when pregnancies became visible, sent away in disgrace while the men responsible faced no consequences. You have learned to make yourself as invisible as possible, to avoid being alone in rooms with men, to deflect any advances with quick thinking and careful words. But you know that safety is never guaranteed, that your virtue is constantly at risk in a world where you have no power and no protection. You begin to internalize the message that you are inferior, that your thoughts and feelings do not matter, that your only value lies in your ability to serve. You catch yourself apologizing for existing, for taking up space, for having needs and desires. You find it difficult to make eye contact with anyone who is not a servant. You automatically defer to others. You have trouble imagining a future in which you are not defined by your relationship to someone else's household. This is perhaps the deepest harm of service, this damage to the soul that is invisible but profound. This sense that you have been erased and replaced with the uniform you wear and the role you play. But you resist this erasure in small ways, every day. You remember your name, your real name, not just the generic girl or maid that the family calls you. You remember where you came from, the village or town or city that you left behind to come to this place. You remember your family, their faces and voices and the warmth of home. And you hold these memories close, protective of them,
because they are proof that you existed before service and might exist after it. But you resist this erasure in small ways, every day. You remember your name, your real name, not just the generic girl or maid that the family calls you. You remember where you came from, the village or town or city that you left behind to come to this place. You remember your family, their faces and voices and the warmth of home, and you hold these memories close, protective of them, because they are proof that you existed before service and might exist after it. You maintain your identity in your mind even as you perform the role of perfect servant with your body, and this dual existence is exhausting but necessary, because to give up your sense of self entirely would be to lose something essential, something that even the harshest employment cannot quite extinguish. The years pass and you grow older in service, and you begin to understand things that were not clear when you first arrived. You understand that the mansion is not just a home, but a carefully constructed performance of wealth and status, and that your labor is what makes that performance possible. You understand that the family's comfort depends entirely on your discomfort, that their leisure is purchased with your toil, that the whole system rests on the exploitation of people like you who have no other options. You understand that this is not a natural or inevitable arrangement, but a choice, a social order maintained through tradition and law and the threat of poverty. And this understanding makes you angry, but you have learned to hide your anger, to smile and curtsy and say yes ma'am and no sir, while inside you are screaming at the injustice of it all. Some maids escape service through marriage, finding partners who can support them and allowing them to leave the mansion for homes of their own. Some save enough money over years of work to start small businesses, shops, or boarding houses, and they break free of service to become their own employers. Some simply endure, working until they are too old and too broken to continue, and then they are turned out with a small pension if they are lucky, and nothing at all if they are not, left to navigate a world that has little use for elderly former servants.
You do not know which path your own life will take, whether you will find a way out or remain in service until the end, but you try to maintain hope, to believe that your current circumstances are not your permanent fate, to imagine that someday you will look back on these years as a difficult chapter in a longer story that includes happiness and freedom and a life lived on your own terms. As the night deepens and the mansion settles into silence, as you lie in your narrow bed surrounded by the soft breathing of the other maids, you think about all the women who have slept in this same room, who have worn the same uniform, who have climbed the same stairs and answered the same bells and scrubbed the same floors. They are ghosts now, their names forgotten, their stories untold. But they were real. They lived and worked and dreamed just as you do, and their labor is woven into the very fabric of the house. The polished banisters carry the memory of their hands, the clean floors testify to their hours of scrubbing, the smooth-running household is their legacy, though no one will ever acknowledge it. You are part of this invisible history, one more maid in an endless line of maids. And while your individual contribution may be forgotten, the collective labor of servants has shaped the world in ways that history books rarely recognize. Sleep finally claims you, pulling you down into dreams where you are sometimes still working, still carrying trays and climbing stairs and answering bells, because even your subconscious cannot entirely escape the patterns of waking life. But sometimes you dream of freedom, of open spaces and unlimited time, of a self that is not defined by service. And these dreams sustain you, giving you the strength to face another day when the bell rings in the pre-dawn darkness and summons you back to duty. The life of a Victorian maid is hard beyond measure, unjust beyond description. But it is also a testament to human resilience, to the capacity to endure, and even to find moments of joy and connection in the most difficult circumstances. You are stronger than you know, more resourceful than you realize, and though the world may not value your labor or recognize your humanity, you know the truth of your own worth, and that knowledge, however fragile, however embattled, is what allows you to rise each morning and face another day. And so the wheel turns, the seasons change, the years pass, and the mansion continues its elegant existence, its beauty maintained by hands that remain invisible,
It's comfort made possible by labor that goes unacknowledged. Behind every grand facade, there is a hidden world of work, and in every Victorian mansion, there are pretty maids, or at least maids who are called pretty, because the term has nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with the particular role they play in the household hierarchy. These are the women who dust the drawing rooms and serve the tea and clean the chamber pots and keep the fires burning, and they do it all while remaining as invisible as possible, present but not present, essential but not valued, human but not treated as fully human. This is their story, the one that is rarely told, the one that has been hidden behind velvet curtains and closed doors, but it is a story that deserves to be heard, because it is the story of millions of women whose labor built the world we inherited, whose sacrifice enabled the comfort of others, whose lives mattered even though they were treated as if they did not. So rest now, dear listener, and as you drift toward sleep, carry with you the memory of these women, these maids who worked until their hands bled and their backs broke, who maintained their dignity in the face of constant degradation, who found ways to laugh and love and hope even in the darkest circumstances. They are the invisible women of history, but they are not forgotten, not entirely, not as long as someone is willing to tell their story, to acknowledge their existence, to say that they were here, they mattered, they endured. Sleep well and dream of a world where labor is valued and workers are respected, where no one must sacrifice their humanity for survival, where the mansions of the future are built on foundations of justice rather than exploitation. The pretty maids of the Victorian era have passed into history, but their legacy remains, a reminder of what humans can endure and a challenge to build a better world for those who come after. Good night, sleep well, and may your dreams be gentle and your rest be deep, here in the quiet hours when the bells have finally fallen silent and the mansion, at last, is still. The seasons turn within the mansion's walls with a rhythm that is both predictable and exhausting, each change bringing its own particular torments and small mercies. You come to know the house not by the family's calendar of social events, but by the quality of light through the scullery window, by the temperature of the stone floors under your feet, by the way the wind howls down the chimneys, or the way the morning air smells when you empty the ashes from the grates. Winter is the cruelest season, when the cold seeps into your bones and never quite leaves, when your hands crack and bleed from the constant transition between icy water and scalding heat, when the fires you tend so carefully warm everyone except you because you are always moving, always in the drafty corridors and unheated passages where servants belong. The mansion in winter becomes a beast that must be constantly fed with coal and wood, its appetite insatiable, its demands relentless. You spend what feels like half your waking hours carrying fuel, hauling heavy scuttles upstairs that seem to multiply in the darkness, your shoulders aching with the weight, your breath coming in clouds that dissipate in the frigid air. The family complains if any room drops below a comfortable temperature, if any fire burns too low or smokes or fails to provide the perfect ambiance of warmth and cheer, but they never see the labor that goes into maintaining this comfort, never witness the armies of servants who work like stokers in the belly of a ship, feeding the fires that keep the cold at bay. Your hands develop chilblains, painful swellings that itch and burn, and there is no remedy except to keep working, to keep plunging your damaged hands into cold water and hot water and the caustic cleaning solutions that make everything worse.
Winter mornings are the darkest, when you rise in pitch blackness and dress by feel, when the attic room is so cold that ice has formed on the inside of the window and your breath creates frost in the air. You wrap yourself in whatever extra layers you can find, but the uniform allows for little variation, and besides, too many petticoats make it difficult to move quickly, and speed is essential in service. You learn to function while cold, to ignore the shivering, to push through the numbness in your fingers and toes, because the work must be done regardless of comfort, regardless of weather, regardless of how you feel. The kitchen becomes the only warm place in the servant's domain, and you find excuses to linger there when you can, standing near the range, absorbing its heat like a plant absorbs sunlight, storing up warmth for the next expedition into the frozen reaches of the house. But winter also brings moments of strange beauty, times when you catch your breath at the sight of frost patterns on windows, at the way snow transforms the familiar garden into something magical and unknown. You stand for a stolen moment, watching snowfall in the lamplight, and you feel something in your chest that might be joy, or might be sorrow, or might be both together. This recognition of beauty in the midst of hardship, this stubborn capacity for wonder, even when you are exhausted and cold and your hands hurt and your future is uncertain. These moments do not make the labor easier, but they remind you that you are still capable of feeling something beyond weariness, still able to see the world as more than just an endless series of tasks to be completed.
Spring arrives not with flowers, but with the dreaded announcement of spring cleaning, words that strike terror into every servant's heart. This is the season when the entire house must be taken apart and reassembled, when every object must be removed and cleaned and polished and returned to its exact place, when the very walls must be scrubbed and the ceilings swept free of cobwebs and the windows washed inside and out until they are invisible. The work begins in early March and continues for weeks, disrupting all normal routines, requiring every hand, testing the limits of endurance and patience. The housekeeper produces lists that seem to grow longer each time you look at them, and she patrols the house with the determination of a general inspecting troops, finding fault, demanding perfection, accepting no excuses. Carpets must be rolled up and carried outside, beaten until no more dust emerges, which in a Victorian mansion means beaten for hours until your arms feel like they might fall off. Curtains must be taken down, and this is a precarious operation involving ladders and hooks and yards of heavy fabric that fights you every step of the way, threatening to pull you off balance, to smother you in dusty velvet or brocade. Everything must be washed, the curtains soaked in enormous tubs and scrubbed and rinsed and hung to dry, taking days to complete. And if the weather is uncooperative, if it rains during spring cleaning, the whole operation becomes a nightmare of damp fabric and mildew and the housekeeper's increasing frustration. Furniture must be moved so that the floors beneath can be cleaned, and Victorian furniture is constructed of solid wood and weighs approximately as much as a small carriage, and you and the other maids must drag these monstrosities across rooms, trying not to scratch the floors, trying not to injure yourselves, trying to remember exactly where each piece belongs so that the family will not notice any changes. The worst task of spring cleaning is washing the walls. Every wall in every room must be wiped down with special solutions, and you stand on ladders reaching up until your neck and shoulders scream in protest, wiping and wringing and wiping again, watching years of accumulated dirt and smoke transfer from wall to cloth. Your arms ache, your back spasms, and still there are more walls, endless walls, the house revealing itself to be far larger than you had imagined when you are the one responsible for cleaning every square inch of it. The ceilings must be swept with long-handled brooms, dislodging spiders and their webs, and you try not to think about what might be falling on you as you work. Try not to flinch when something brushes against your face, because flinching might mean losing your balance, and falling from a ladder would be disastrous in ways both immediate and long-term. Windows are their own special torment during spring cleaning because they must be perfect, absolutely streak-free, clean enough that birds might fly into them, mistaking them for open air. You mix solutions of vinegar and water, you scrub and polish and buff, and still the housekeeper finds smudges, streaks, imperfections that must be corrected. You learn to clean windows in specific patterns, to check them from multiple angles, to pray for cloudy days when flaws are less visible, and you develop a hatred for windows that is deep and abiding because there are so many of them, enormous Victorian windows that let in light and let everyone see your failures if you do not clean them properly. Your reflection looks back at you from the glass and you barely recognize yourself, this thin, tired girl with her hair pulled back too tightly and her dress stained with cleaning solutions, and her expression somewhere between determination and despair.
But spring cleaning does eventually end, and when it does, there is a sense of collective accomplishment among the servants, a feeling that you have survived something significant, that you have proven yourselves capable of extraordinary effort. The house gleams in a way it does not at any other time of year. And even though you know that dust and dirt will begin accumulating immediately, that within weeks the visible evidence of all this labor will have faded, there is still pride in what you have achieved. The family comments approvingly on how fresh everything looks, and the mistress might even compliment the housekeeper, who in turn might offer a few grudging words of acknowledgement to the staff. And you accept these crumbs of recognition as the feast they represent, because praise is rare and therefore precious in the world of service. Summer brings its own challenges, though they are different in character from winter's cold or spring's chaos. The mansion in summer is stuffy and close, the heavy curtains that keep out winter drafts now trapping heat, the fires that must still be lit for cooking, turning the kitchen into something resembling a foundry.
You sweat through your uniform, the heavy black fabric clinging to your skin, the starched apron wilting despite your best efforts to keep it crisp. The family complains about the heat while doing nothing to generate it, while you labor over stoves and carry hot water and iron linens with irons heated to temperatures that could brand flesh. And the irony of this is not lost on you, though you would never voice it aloud. Flies become a constant nuisance, invading the kitchen, landing on food, requiring constant vigilance, and the use of fly papers that hang from ceilings, sticky and disgusting, and moderately effective. The family often decamps to their country house or to the seaside during the hottest months, and those left behind to maintain the townhouse experience a strange mixture of relief and increased burden. Relief because the family's absence means fewer bells ringing, fewer immediate demands, a slightly more relaxed atmosphere below stairs. Increased burden because this is when major projects are undertaken, repairs and painting and deep cleaning that cannot be accomplished while the family is in residence. And there is always a skeleton staff left behind, and you might be part of this group, chosen to stay while others accompany the family or take their own brief holidays. And you feel the unfairness of this, the way your life is determined by the needs and whims of others, the way you have no control over your own time or choices. Garden parties in summer are spectacles that require enormous preparation and generate enormous work. The family decides to entertain outdoors, and suddenly you are carrying furniture into the garden, setting up tables and chairs on the lawn, transporting china and glassware and linens across uneven ground, praying that nothing will be dropped or broken. You serve lemonade and tea and elaborate cakes, and you battle wasps that are attracted to the sweet offerings, and you try to maintain your composure while sweat runs down your back and the sun beats down mercilessly. The family and their guests lounge in the shade, dressed in white and pastels, looking effortlessly elegant, while you and the other servants move among them in your dark uniforms, nearly invisible except when needed, suffering from the heat but required to appear cool and unaffected. Thunderstorms in summer bring a different kind of chaos, sudden downpours that threaten any outdoor events, that send you scrambling to rescue furniture and food, that turn gardens into mud and create tracked footprints through the house that must be immediately cleaned. But storms also bring blessed coolness, temporary relief from oppressive heat, and you stand at the scullery door during a lull in your work and watch the rain fall and smell the earth and feel the temperature drop. And for a moment you are grateful for the small mercy of weather that cannot be controlled even by the wealthy. Lightning illuminates the mansion in stark flashes, thunder rattles windows, and you are reminded that nature is more powerful than any household, that there are forces in the world that do not care about polished silver or starched linens or the elaborate rules of Victorian society. Autumn is perhaps the most beautiful season, even you must admit this, when the trees in the square turn gold and red and the air requires a crispness that is invigorating after summer's humidity. But autumn also means preparing for winter, laying in supplies, preserving the harvest, readying the house for the cold months ahead. The kitchen becomes a factory of preservation, and you are conscripted to help with endless peeling and chopping and stirring, transforming fresh produce into jams and chutneys and pickles that will be stored in the larder.
Your hands are stained purple from berries, yellow from turmeric, and they burn from the vinegar used in pickling, and the cook rules her domain with increased intensity during this season because there is so much to do and limited time to do it, and the family's comfort through the winter depends on the success of these efforts. Apples must be picked and sorted, the best ones wrapped individually and stored in the cool cellar, the damaged ones transformed into sauce or pie filling. Pears must be preserved in syrup, plums must be transformed into jam, and every batch must be properly sealed or it will spoil, wasting precious resources and inviting the cook's wrath. You learn the chemistry of preservation, the importance of sugar ratios and sterilization and proper sealing techniques, and you take a certain satisfaction in rows of filled jars, physical evidence of labor completed, tangible preparation for future needs. The work is repetitive and tedious, standing at the table for hours, performing the same motions again and again until your hands move automatically and your mind drifts elsewhere. But there is also something meditative about it, a rhythm that is almost soothing once you surrender to it.
As autumn progresses toward winter, there is an increasing awareness that the year is dying, that darkness is gaining ground, that the brief reprieve of summer is over, and you are heading back into the hardest season. The fires must be cleaned and restocked, chimneys must be swept, windows must be sealed against drafts, and heavy curtains must be hung to keep out the cold. You help with all of this, and you feel the weight of the coming winter, the knowledge that you will soon be cold again, that your hands will soon hurt again, that the easy breathing of summer will give way to the chest-tightening coughs that afflict so many servants during the winter months. But you also know that you will survive, because you always have, because you are stronger than you sometimes believe, because giving up is not an option when survival depends on continuing. The approach of Christmas brings mixed feelings, excitement and dread intertwined. The mansion must be decorated, transformed into a vision of festive cheer, and this falls to the servants to accomplish. Evergreen boughs must be cut and brought inside, filling the house with the scent of pine and winter forest, and you spend hours winding them along banisters and around door frames, securing them with wire and ribbon, trying to achieve the perfect look that the mistress has described in increasingly elaborate instructions. Holly, with its sharp leaves and red berries, must be arranged carefully, both for aesthetic effect and to avoid the scratches that come from careless handling.
Mistletoe must be hung in doorways, and you are aware of the tradition associated with this plant, aware that it creates opportunities for stolen kisses, and you are both hopeful and anxious about this, depending on who might take advantage of the tradition. The Christmas preparations seem to begin earlier each year, with lists appearing in November and the cooks starting to make puddings and mincemeat weeks before the actual holiday. The puddings must be made well in advance to allow them to mature, and everyone in the household must take a turn stirring the mixture while making a wish, a tradition that you participate in with a mixture of superstition and cynicism, wishing for things you barely dare articulate even in your own mind, wishing for change, for escape, for a better life, for love, for rest, for any of the 1,000 things that you lack and desire. The mincemeat for pies must be prepared and stored, and the scent of spices fills the kitchen, cinnamon and cloves and nutmeg, exotic and expensive, and used with a lavishness that seems almost shocking after the careful economy that governs most of the household's operations. As Christmas Eve approaches, the work intensifies to a nearly unbearable level. The house must be perfect, every surface gleaming, every decoration precisely placed, every meal planned and prepared with meticulous attention to detail. The family will host parties and entertain guests, and the servants must ensure that everything runs smoothly, that food appears as if by magic, that fires burn cheerfully, that the whole elaborate production unfolds without a single visible hitch.
You work from before dawn until well after midnight, snatching minutes of rest when you can, sustained by weak tea and the increasingly distant hope that eventually this will be over and you will be allowed to sleep. Your feet ache with a deep, persistent pain that radiates up your legs. Your back feels like it might snap, and your hands are raw from constant washing and scrubbing and handling of hot dishes and cold silver.
Christmas Day itself is a strange experience for servants, a day when the normal routines are disrupted, but the work is, if anything, more intense. The family wakes late and expects an elaborate breakfast. Then there is church, which requires additional preparations of clothing and transportation. Then there is the grand Christmas dinner, which is the culmination of weeks of planning and involves more courses than seem reasonable and requires every servant working at maximum capacity. You serve goose and turkey and ham. You bring vegetables and sauces and elaborate desserts. You pour wine and clear plates and try to maintain the serene, invisible presence that is expected, even though you are dead on your feet and want nothing more than to sit down for just 5 minutes. The family toasts and laughs and enjoys themselves, and you are happy for them in an abstract way, but mostly you are just tired, so tired that you feel like you might cry, though you do not, because crying is not permitted, because servants must not display emotion, because your feelings are not relevant to anyone except yourself. Late on Christmas night, after the family has finally retired and the last dishes have been washed and the kitchen has been restored to order, the servants gather for their own small celebration.
The cook has saved some food for you, and someone produces a bottle of something warming, and you sit together in the servants' hall, too exhausted to do much more than smile at each other, sharing the exhausted camaraderie of those who have survived a battle together. The butler makes a small speech, thanking everyone for their hard work, and the housekeeper's face softens slightly, and for a brief moment the strict hierarchy relaxes, and you are all just people, tired people who have earned their rest. Someone sings a carol, and others join in, and the sound is thin and wavering but genuine, and you feel your throat tighten with emotion, with gratitude for this moment of community, with sorrow for everything you have sacrificed to be here, with hope that someday things might be different. The days between Christmas and New Year are strange and suspended, the house existing in a state of half celebration, half recovery. There are still guests and parties, but the frenetic energy of Christmas has passed, and there is a winding down quality to everything. You continue working, but perhaps with slightly less intensity, and you allow yourself to think about the year that is ending and the year that is beginning, and you wonder what it will bring. Will you still be here next Christmas, in this house, serving this family? Will you have found a better position, escaped to something easier or at least different? Will you have saved enough money to consider other options, or will you still be trapped in service with no visible path forward? These questions have no answers, and you try not to dwell on them, but they persist in quiet moments, reminders that your life is uncertain, your future unclear, your choices limited by circumstances beyond your control. Twelfth Night marks the official end of Christmas, and this means all the decorations must come down. Every evergreen bough and sprig of holly must be removed. Every ribbon must be taken away, and the house must be returned to its normal state. This is somehow sadder than putting the decorations up, this undoing of beauty, this return to ordinary life. You gather armfuls of dried evergreens, now brittle and dropping needles, and carry them outside to be burned or composted, and the scent of them is still pleasant but tinged with decay, a reminder that all things are temporary. The rooms seem bare and cold without their festive decorations, and you feel the weight of winter settling in more heavily now that there is no holiday to anticipate, nothing to break the monotony of the dark months ahead except the slow waiting for spring. But life in the mansion continues regardless of season, the endless cycle of tasks repeating with minor variations, and you settle back into the familiar routines with the resignation of someone who has learned that acceptance is easier than resistance. The days blur together, marked by bells and meals and the changing quality of light through windows, and you begin to feel that you have always been here, that your life before service was something that happened to someone else, a dream you had once and have half forgotten. This is perhaps the most insidious effect of service, this gradual erosion of your sense of a separate self, this slow process by which you become the role you play, until the maid in the black dress with the white apron is not a disguise you put on each morning, but the only identity you can clearly remember. Yet there are moments when something breaks through this numbness, when you catch sight of yourself in a mirror and are startled by your own face, when a letter from home arrives and suddenly you remember that there are people who know you by your actual name and not just as girl or maid. When you smell something that reminds you of childhood and you are overwhelmed by a wave of longing so intense it takes your breath away. These moments are both precious and painful, reminders that you are still yourself underneath the uniform, still capable of memory and desire and feeling, but also reminders of how far you are from home, how much you have sacrificed, how much of yourself you have had to set aside in order to survive in this place. You do not know whether these moments make the work easier or harder, whether remembering who you are is a source of strength or just another burden to carry alongside all the others. The relationships you form below stairs become your lifeline, the connections that make survival possible. There are the other maids, women at various stages of their own journeys through service, and you learn from them, trade advice and warnings, share the small rebellions and private jokes that make the days bearable. There is the older maid who has been with the family for 15 years, who knows every trick for avoiding the housekeeper's displeasure, who can predict the family's moods and needs with uncanny accuracy. And you watch her with a mixture of admiration and pity, wondering if you will still be here in 15 years, whether you will become like her, so thoroughly adapted to service that you cannot imagine any other life. There is the young maid who arrived just months ago, still making mistakes, still sometimes crying at night when she thinks no one can hear, and you try to help her, to offer the same kindness that was offered to you when you were new, though you are aware that you cannot shield her from the harsh realities she must learn to navigate on her own. There is the kitchen maid who makes you laugh with her imitations of the cook's pronouncements and her running commentary on the absurdities of household life. And these moments of shared laughter are like light breaking through clouds, brief but brilliant. There is the scullery maid at the very bottom of the hierarchy, who works harder than anyone for the least reward, and you try to be kind to her, even though kindness costs you nothing and changes nothing about her circumstances, because you remember what it felt like to be the lowest, to be the one everyone else could look down on. These women are not exactly friends. The circumstances of service do not allow for friendship in any traditional sense, but they are companions in hardship, fellow survivors, and you are bound together by the shared experience of service in ways that outsiders could never understand. And then there is the question of romance, always complicated, always dangerous, always tempting despite the risks. The rules forbid it, the housekeeper watches for it, the consequences of being caught are severe, but human nature persists regardless of rules. You find yourself noticing the second footman, the way he smiles, the way his presence makes your pulse quicken, and you tell yourself this is foolish, that nothing can come of it, that you are risking your position and your future for the sake of feelings that might be nothing more than loneliness and proximity. But you cannot quite suppress the hope, the daydreams of conversations that might happen, of hands that might touch in passing, of a future that might include something beyond endless work. You are careful, so careful, revealing nothing through your expression or your actions, but inside you are aware of him constantly, tracking his movements through the house, looking for opportunities to be in the same space, playing a game that is both thrilling and terrifying in its potential consequences. Sleep, when it finally comes each night, is not exactly rest, but more like unconsciousness, your body simply shutting down from exhaustion, and your dreams are strange mixtures of the day's events and deeper fears and longings. You dream of being lost in endless corridors, of bells ringing that you cannot locate, of falling down stairs that extend infinitely downward, of standing before the family unable to speak or move. But you also dream of home, of faces you have not seen in months or years, of meals shared around a table where you are not serving but eating, of conversations in which your opinion matters and your voice is heard. You dream of freedom, whatever that might mean, of a life in which you are not constantly watched and judged and corrected, in which your time is your own, and your choices are genuine choices rather than simply different forms of compliance. And sometimes, rarely, you dream of the future you dare to hope for, a small house of your own, a family, a life lived on your own terms, and you wake from these dreams with your face wet with tears, grieving for something you have never had and may never have, mourning a future that exists only in imagination. The passage of years in service marks you in ways both visible and invisible. Your hands, once soft, become rough and calloused, marked by burns and cuts and the corrosive effects of cleaning solutions. Your back develops a permanent ache from lifting and carrying. Your knees protest when you climb stairs. Your feet are misshapen from hours in ill-fitting shoes. But the deeper marks are internal, changes to how you see yourself and the world, adaptations that allow you to survive, but at a cost you are not always aware of paying. You become hypervigilant, always listening for bells, always watching for signs of displeasure, always anticipating needs before they are expressed. You learn to make yourself small, to take up as little space as possible, to move through the world apologetically, as if your existence is an imposition that must be constantly justified through usefulness. You internalize the message that you are inferior, that your thoughts and feelings are less important than those of the people you serve, and this message shapes you in ways you will carry long after you leave service, if you ever leave service. But you also develop strengths that you did not know you possessed, reserves of endurance and resilience that allow you to keep going when everything in you wants to stop. You learn that you can survive more than you thought possible, that pain and exhaustion and humiliation do not have to break you, that you can endure and still retain some core of yourself that remains intact. You discover a capacity for strategic thinking, for navigating complex social situations, for reading unspoken communication and responding appropriately. You become an expert in household management, knowing intimately how to keep a large establishment running smoothly, and this knowledge has value even if it is not recognized or rewarded. You forge bonds with other servants that are based on genuine understanding, on shared experience that creates solidarity, and you learn that support can come from unexpected places, that kindness can survive even in harsh environments. And perhaps most importantly, you maintain hope, however fragile, however battered by reality, however difficult to sustain in the face of daily evidence that your circumstances are unlikely to change. You hope that tomorrow will be better than today, that next year will bring opportunities, that eventually you will find a way to something different. You hope that the work you do matters even if it is not acknowledged, that your labor contributes to the world in ways that have value beyond what the family recognizes. You hope that you will be remembered, if only by the other servants, that your life will not pass entirely without trace, that you will have mattered to someone. This hope is not always strong enough to comfort you, not always sufficient to counter the weight of despair that sometimes threatens to overwhelm you, but it persists nonetheless, a stubborn flicker that refuses to be completely extinguished. As the night deepens and the mansion falls into its final silence, as the last lamp is extinguished and the last door is closed, you lie in your narrow bed and take stock of your life with the brutal honesty that only exhaustion allows. You acknowledge the hardships, the injustices, the ways in which your humanity is denied and your labor is exploited. You recognize that the system you serve is fundamentally unjust, that the comfort of the few is purchased with the suffering of the many, that your position is not natural or inevitable, but the result of social arrangements that could be different. But you also acknowledge your own strength, your survival, your refusal to be completely crushed by circumstances. You recognize that you are part of a vast, invisible army of working women whose labor has built and sustained civilization even as they have been excluded from its benefits and written out of its histories. You know that your story matters, even if no one is listening, even if no one records it for posterity, even if you are forgotten as soon as you are gone. And so you close your eyes one more time, surrendering to sleep and to dreams that carry you beyond the walls of the mansion, beyond the constraints of your position, into spaces where you are free and valued and whole. Tomorrow you will wake, and the bells will ring, and the work will begin again. But tonight, in this moment, you rest, you breathe, you exist as yourself. And that small victory, that maintenance of your own humanity in the face of forces designed to erase it, is perhaps the greatest triumph of all. Sleep now, Victorian maid. Sleep deeply and dream boldly,
for you have earned this rest 1,000 times over. And though the world may not recognize your worth, you know it, and that knowledge, however hard won, is yours to keep forever.